The small room smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Sunlight streamed through a single window, landing on the piano in the corner. Its black and white keys gleamed softly. A few people had gathered, some friends, some acquaintances, and a few who had never seen the pianist before. The atmosphere was calm, almost casual. No one expected anything extraordinary. They were there because someone had said, "She plays the piano. Come see." The young woman sitting on the piano bench felt her hands tremble slightly. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The room was quiet, but in that quiet, a louder sound rang inside her. Minda, voice of doubt. For years, she had practiced alone, her fingers learning the keys, while her mind repeated the same thought over and over. I'm not good enough. Her eyes scanned the room. People smiled, nodded politely, and whispered softly. No one seemed impatient, but she imagined they were judging. She imagined them thinking her simple notes would be boring. Just a few basic chords, then done. Nothing special. She hated that thought. Music had always been more than notes to her. It had always carried her feelings, her memories, and her heart. She pressed her fingers gently on the keys. The first sound was soft, hesitant, almost fragile. A simple sequence of notes, quiet and unassuming. The audience nodded slightly. Some whispered, some shifted in their seats. It felt ordinary. Exactly what she had feared. And yet, behind that fragility was a story no one in the room could see. Each note carried a piece of her journey, the nights she had stayed awake practicing, the times she had stumbled and cried over mistakes, the moments she wanted to give up but didn't. She had learned long ago that music didn't need to be loud to be felt. It didn't need applause. It needed honesty. But tonight, honesty felt risky. She had never played in front of this many people. She had never shown her vulnerability so openly. She was scared. What if her hands froze? What if the notes sounded wrong? What if, after all her practice, they laughed or worse, ignored her? Her eyes lowered to the keys again. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately. The notes were simple, repetitive, almost meditative. They weren't meant to impress anyone. They were meant to open a door into her world. And yet, even as she played, the doubt lingered, like a shadow in the corner of the room. A memory flickered in her mind. She was younger, sitting at the same piano she had begged her parents to buy. Her first recital. She had stumbled over a simple piece, and someone had whispered, "Maybe it's not for you." She had felt that sting for years, letting it settle in her mind like a small, sharp stone. But tonight, she reminded herself, things were different. She had practiced. She had learned not just the notes, but how to let the music speak for her. The audience listened politely at first. The conversations had faded now. All that remained was the soft click of her fingers on the keys, and the occasional creak of the piano bench as she shifted slightly. Some people thought they were hearing something nice, nothing more, a melody to fill the room. They didn't know that each note she played carried hours of struggle, layers of emotion, and pieces of her heart. She could feel it, the connection that happens when music begins to speak louder than words. A few people leaned forward, curiosity breaking through polite disinterest. She noticed it, though she kept her eyes on the keys. She kept her fingers moving, letting the melody unfold naturally. Each note felt like a small breath released from her chest, a whisper of the feelings she had kept locked inside for so long. Then came a pause, a small pause, almost imperceptible, but enough for her to feel it in her stomach. She hesitated, just for a moment. The room was silent now. In that silence, she could hear the beating of her own heart. The beating seemed loud, like it belonged not just to her, but to everyone in the room. She swallowed, took another breath, and pressed on. Her next set of notes felt slightly more confident. She allowed herself to stretch a little, exploring the piano beyond the cautious patterns she had practiced. Her fingers moved faster now, smoother. The melody carried a feeling hard to describe, a mix of hope, longing, and quiet strength. It wasn't a song meant for applause yet, but the people in the room could feel it. Something different. Something alive. One listener near the front tilted their head. They exchanged a glance with the person next to them, silently acknowledging that something unexpected was happening. The notes were still simple, yes, but the emotion behind them was undeniable. There was honesty in the way she played, a vulnerability that reached through the polite masks people usually wore. She paused again, shorter this time, not because she needed to, but because she felt the room leaning toward her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. The energy of the audience was enough. She had felt it before in quiet rooms, practicing, alone, imagining a future where someone else could feel what she felt when she played. Tonight, that feeling was real. A memory came back. Her first time learning a difficult passage. She had cried that day, frustrated with her mistakes. But her teacher had said, "The piano doesn't care if you fail. The piano listens, and it will carry your feelings if you let it." She had laughed at the time, feeling too small to believe it. But tonight, she understood. The piano was listening, and somehow, in its quiet way, it was helping her speak. The melody shifted slightly, subtle changes that only careful listeners would notice. Her fingers moved almost instinctively, guided by memory and emotion. She didn't plan these variations. They came from inside her, a reflection of her journey, the frustration, the hope, the fear, and the small triumphs she had earned alone. Some in the audience began to notice the change. One leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes wide with surprise. Another tilted their head, letting a small smile appear. Even those who had been distracted were now attentive. The piano, which had seemed just an object, had become a bridge. It connected her to everyone in the room, showing them a piece of her story without words. She felt a wave of emotion rise inside her. Her chest tightened, her throat felt dry, but she didn't stop. She played on, letting the notes flow freely. No more hesitation, no more doubt. Every press of a key was deliberate. Every pause had intention. She was no longer thinking about whether people would like it or judge her. She was simply there, simply playing, simply being. And in that moment, she felt something new. She felt seen. Not in a superficial way, not in polite nods, but truly seen. She felt the invisible weight of years of fear and self-doubt lifting, replaced by a fragile but growing confidence. She realized she could transform a simple melody into something that touched hearts. Sometimes, it only took a single moment of courage to show your true self. The audience, unaware of the depth of her journey, still responded in small ways. A quiet gasp here, a nod there, the softening of shoulders. They didn't know why, but they felt its honesty, the emotion, the truth in the notes. And in that feeling, the young woman found reassurance. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need complex pieces or technical skill. She only needed to play from her heart. The melody continued, still simple, but richer now, infused with her emotion. And just as she reached a point of small triumph, she paused. A long, deliberate pause. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She let the silence fill the room, carrying all the tension, all the anticipation. The room felt heavy with it, the kind of quiet that made you hold your breath without noticing. Her eyes stayed lowered, but she felt everyone's gaze. She could sense it, the curiosity, the expectation, the faint hope that something extraordinary was about to happen. And in that instant, she understood. The simplest notes, played with honesty and courage, could make people stop, think, and feel. She had captured their attention, not with grandeur, but with truth. She exhaled slowly, feeling her chest loosen a little. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself a small smile. She had come this far. She had begun a journey she had been too afraid to start. And now, she felt the possibility of something greater, a chance to go beyond simple notes, to let the music soar, to connect with hearts. The room remained quiet, not awkwardly quiet, but alive with anticipation. Every listener leaned forward, slightly, as if unconsciously preparing for what might come next. And in her heart, a tiny spark of courage flickered. She knew the next part of her performance would decide everything. She prepared herself. Her fingers hovered over the keys, ready to move beyond the simple notes that had started this story. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the room, the presence of the audience, and the truth of her own feelings. Then, she began to play again, and the sense of anticipation in the room grew. And that is where part 1 ends, leaving the audience holding their breath, waiting for what would come next. The moment her fingers touched the keys again, the room seemed to change. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was alive. Every breath, every heartbeat in the small audience seemed to sync with the rhythm of her music. The simple notes that had started her story were gone. What came next was something raw, unplanned, and beautiful. Her hands moved with a confidence she hadn't known she had. Each chord rang out clearly, each note carrying a piece of her soul. She had never played this way before in front of anyone, yet it felt natural, as if the piano itself were guiding her hands. She no longer feared mistakes. Each sound was a declaration, a whisper, a cry, a laugh, a memory. A few people in the room leaned closer, as if drawn by an invisible thread. One listener's eyes widened, almost disbelieving what they were hearing. Another pressed their hands together, holding their breath. The music was no longer background. It was a story being told in sound, a language without words. Yet every person in the room understood it. She remembered the nights she had spent alone, learning to trust herself. The frustration, the tears, the endless practice every moment led to this. She had questioned herself for so long, wondering if she was enough, wondering if anyone would ever hear the real music in her. But now, she felt it. The music wasn't just in her fingers, it was in her heart. Her melody grew bolder, yet it never lost its delicacy. Soft notes floated like whispers, then rose to gentle waves of sound that seemed to fill the entire room. She could see reactions without looking. A few faces glistened with unshed tears. Some people's mouths hung open, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. The piano, a simple instrument, had become a bridge between her and everyone in the room. A memory surfaced, one she had almost forgotten. She had been 12, trying to learn a complicated piece she could never master. Frustrated, she had thrown her hands in the air and cried, certain she would never be good enough. Her teacher had said quietly, "It's not about the notes, it's about what you feel. If you play that, people will feel it too." She hadn't understood then. Now, she did. The music swelled, growing in confidence and warmth. Every note seemed to carry a fragment of her story, the lonely nights, the self-doubt, the secret hope that someday, someone would understand. And in that very room, the audience began to feel it, not as words, not as ideas, but as raw, unfiltered emotion. They felt her courage, her fear, her honesty. The young woman didn't notice when a few people gasped softly. She didn't notice the way one listener had tears running down their cheeks, or how another clenched their hands tightly in awe. She wasn't performing anymore. She was speaking, letting the piano tell what her voice could not. Her hands flew over the keys, faster now, yet each note was precise, deliberate. She could feel the room holding its breath, the energy rising, almost electric. She glanced up, just slightly, and saw eyes wide with wonder. And then, in that instant, she understood something powerful. She was not alone. The music she had thought existed only in her small apartment, in her quiet moments of practice, was now living in every heart in that room. A small smile appeared on her lips. She allowed herself a deep breath and let her emotions pour into every note. The melody became richer, more intricate, but it never felt forced. It was as if she had opened a door that had been locked for years, and now everything inside her could finally escape. She played with everything she had, yet it felt effortless. The room was still. Not silent, exactly. Not completely. But the sounds of the piano, the pauses between the notes, the tiny shifts in rhythm, they were enough to make the air itself feel alive. Every listener had stopped thinking about anything else. They weren't imagining what to say or what to do next. They were listening. They were living this moment with her. And then came the part she had been afraid of the most. A passage she had once tried and failed countless times. The one that had made her cry when she was younger. She had imagined failing here tonight, imagined the room stiffening, imagining humiliation. But now, something inside her had changed. She didn't hesitate. She didn't doubt. She simply let the music flow. The notes rolled out like a river, steady and strong, yet gentle. Every mistake she had once feared melted away. She felt free. The audience felt it too. A few hands moved slightly, as if unconsciously reaching for the emotion in the music. Their faces softened. Their bodies leaned in. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She could feel the connection. She could feel the hearts around her responding. Her mind drifted to another memory a teacher telling her once. Music isn't about perfection. It's about truth. If you play truth, people will listen. She had rolled her eyes at the time. She understood now. Tonight, that truth was flowing through her. Every note, every pause, every gentle touch of the keys was truth. And the room was listening. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't stop. She'll let it fall. Let the music carry it. She wasn't just playing. She was telling a story. Her story. The story of every quiet hour of practice, every doubt, every failure, every small triumph. And in that story, the audience found themselves. They felt her fears, her hopes, her courage. They didn't just hear music, they felt it. The young woman's fingers began to slow, a soft cadence emerging. The grand finale, the moment that would linger in memory, was coming. She had never been sure if she could reach this point, if she had the strength to bear herself like this. But now she did. Every muscle, every thought, every feeling had led here. Every struggle was worth it. She played the final notes, long and clear. They stretched across the room, fading slowly, like sunlight slipping behind clouds. The silence that followed was powerful, heavy with awe and emotion. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It was alive. It was the sound of hearts catching their breath, of minds absorbing what they had just experienced. The young woman slowly lifted her hands from the keys. She exhaled deeply, feeling a warmth she had never known. The fear, the doubt, the years of second-guessing herself, they felt distant now, replaced by something new. A quiet strength, a fragile but growing confidence. A sense that she had done something important. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then came a soft murmur, then another. Eyes glistened. Smiles appeared. Some listeners clapped softly at first, unsure if they should, then more boldly. Others simply sat, absorbing the feeling, letting it sink in. The room was alive with emotion, but it was subtle, quiet, human. She looked around and finally met some eyes in the audience. She saw admiration, surprise, a kind of respect she had never expected. And in that moment, she realized something she had always known deep down, but had been too afraid to admit. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about showing truth, about letting your heart speak. And when you did, people would hear it. The applause grew, not overwhelming, not chaotic, but warm and genuine. People were clapping for her courage as much as for her skill. For the first time, she felt seen, not just noticed, but truly seen. And in that recognition, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The years of doubt and fear, the quiet nights of practice and tears they had all led to this. She smiled, softly, almost shyly. She felt gratitude, not just for the audience, but for herself. For every moment she had endured, for every time she had chosen to keep practicing instead of giving up. That journey, those small choices, had brought her here. The room remained filled with a quiet energy, the kind that lingers after something extraordinary. People weren't just listening, they were carrying the memory with them. They would remember how something so simple, a few notes from one person's heart, could stop time, could make them feel, could connect them to another soul so completely. She rose from the piano bench slowly, letting her hands rest gently at her sides. The piano now seemed different, almost alive. It had listened. It had carried her feelings, and together, they had shared something more than music. They had shared a part of life itself. And in that moment, she understood something important. Courage wasn't about never being afraid. It wasn't about being flawless. Courage was about taking the first step anyway. It was about trusting yourself, trusting your voice, and believing that what you have to give matters. The audience, still murmuring softly, didn't yet know the full impact of what they had witnessed, but she did. She had found her voice. She had found her courage, and she had shared it in the most honest, human way possible. As people slowly began to leave, they looked back at her, lingering a little, reluctant to break the spell, and she, too, lingered, letting the silence settle, feeling the warmth of connection. A single evening, a simple piano, a few notes, yet it had changed everything, and in that quiet room, she finally allowed herself to believe something she had never truly believed before. She was enough. Her music was enough. Her courage was enough, and the world had heard her.